Yeah, my name is Jeff. I live here in Atlanta. I live in a neighborhood called East Atlanta Village. I lead this organization called Plywood People. Plywood is a nonprofit here that leads a community of startups doing good. In the last 4 years, we've worked with now close to 400 different startup projects. And we say that, when you work with startups, that doesn't mean they're all sustaining and flourishing today. Some of those startups are for-profits, some are nonprofits, and many are for-profits that have yet to make a profit. Those projects are either out of business or they're just simply broke. Do you guys have any friends that you can relate with that scenario, right? But in general, most of the people we work with have this kind of social bent to what they're doing. They see the world, they want to be a part of restoring it in some way. They see that it is broken in some way. They see a problem, they feel a sense of calling and purpose to fix, and they ultimately believe that something can be better, and they're willing to do whatever it takes to see that come to life. And that's the shared ethos. We don't come from only a Christian perspective, which I know this event has a focus in that direction. But a lot of the people, I think, see and believe that there's something bigger that they are supposed to be a part of. And they're definitely on some spiritual journey in the midst of the work that they're doing. How that plays out is we have these bigger events and gatherings that we do that draw large numbers of people towards our organization. And from there, we have a digital program called Path by Plywood that some people through Do Good X are going to actually start on Monday, which we're super excited about. It's a 6-week program where it really gives you a baseline of whether you probably should pursue your idea or not. It is truly successful for us if someone goes through the 6 weeks and determines they don't want to do it or they shouldn't do it. They invest a couple $100 and they realize they don't have to give their life to this thing. That's actually a good process. Then we have a retreat process that we take people through, and it's a 3-day intensive. Then there's all different programs we have throughout our space and through monthly gatherings. Do Good X is a great partner of ours. They're kind of, working with us to kind of go, how can we use the things that we've learned through Plywood and integrate them through the community that they lead. So, it's been great getting to know Stephen and his team and this work. And so today I want to share a little bit about my story and how we got to this place. And honestly, I think how social entrepreneurship is going forward, and I'm going to use some different terms than that. But for me, I first heard about social entrepreneurship. It was about 9 years ago, and I was at Sundance Film Festival, and I had gone to a talk back with. It was right around the season that Hotel Rwanda came out. There was a few different social movies that were coming out, and in the panel was a guy named Robert Redford, right, and this guy named Jeffrey Skull, and a couple other people. I remember those two specifically. And sorry, I'm having a couple friends that have just walked in, which is very exciting to see people, warm faces. And I remember I was sitting in the back of this room and they were talking about this new idea called social entrepreneurship. And my mind was just fluttered with ideas. And Jeffrey Skull, who ended up, I think he was at eBay and sold and started something called Participant Productions, which if you look at probably all your favorite social movies that brought really controversial issues in some capacity to light and told it in a new story, Participant probably produced it in some way in the last 10 years. And so it made me think about what does that mean for me in my life and what my responsibility is for the problems I see in the world. I think oftentimes there's these pioneers that start the things, and those of us that are a little bit further back from culture. I mean, Robert Redford is quite the pioneer. He created Sundance, right? Now we're starting to integrate it into life. And I think social entrepreneurship is a huge part of where things are going. We have this phrase we use at Plywood called, we will be known by the problems we solve. In the midst of a social media era, oftentimes people are trying to build personal brands. We try as an organization to get behind people that are trying to solve problems. You think about some of the people in the last 10 years that have become synonymous with problem solving. A great person is Blake Mycoskie. Does anybody know who Blake is? Yes. What did Blake do? Tom's Shoes, right? You couldn't say his name without saying Tom's Shoes. So he focused on the problem solving initiative that he had. Now granted, some people have all different opinions about Tom's. This is not a pitch for Tom's. I'm not sponsored by Tom's. But, right, they defined the one-for-one concept. And in the midst of that, he created this project, and his name became synonymous as a problem solver. We'll be known by the problems we solve. So my background, I'm a pastor's kid. I'm 37 years old. Growing up, I was in this kind of leadership circles. My dad was an assistant pastor to a leadership guy named John Maxwell. He's the leadership expert, 21 irrefutable laws of leadership. And the reason why I want to show you this chart, because I think there's been a progression in our culture of some of this content that we're talking about today and where we are today. So in the 70s, 75 to 85, there was a guy named Zig Ziglar that became really popular. And just so you know, I got my allowance growing up, $10 a book for reading all these books I refer to and these people that you had. So my dad would come back from these gatherings. He would bring books. He'd set them on the table for me and my sisters. He'd say, you get this book, you get this book, you get this book. You have to read it, underline it, highlight it, write a one-page report, and I will give you $10 allowance, which was great for a 10-year-old kid, right? What I didn't realize is that he integrated all of our notes into his sermons the following Sunday. So it was a Cliff Notes version for my dad. But in the midst of it, it built a lot of things within me I didn't even realize that was happening. So in the 70s, motivational speakers were huge, and motivation in general led economy. If you think about it, that was the era that Amway and some of the, depending on your background, let's call it multi-level marketing. It was a huge thing. Mary Kay, you would go to these huge events in arenas and they'd bring out a pink Cadillac and they say, you can have one too, right? And it was like, wow, I'm going to do that. I'm going to bring it back and I'm going to have a pink Cadillac. And that was like the motivator. The guy's name was Zig Ziglar, Dale Carnegie. Well, Carnegie was a lot earlier than that, but his book became very popular in that era. Some of these motivational thinkers were the leaders of that time. And in the 80s, when Maxwell started writing some of his stuff and other people, there was a focus on leadership. And a lot of the institutions you guys may be connected with, there's still a focus on leadership, but that principle of leadership has definitely changed over time. So that became a huge topic in the 80s, which led to the dot-com era of the 90s, where innovation was everything, and you throw as many millions of dollars at a dot-com as possible until all the dot-coms failed, but that was definitely a focus. In the early 2000s is when social media started emerging, right? Think about, I don't know if any of you guys know how long you've been on Facebook, but I think they celebrated 10 or 11 years just recently. So that was when the influential mindset started coming in, because what happened was we started quantifying the influence of people that we knew. You could see it online, literally, right? And there was always someone with more influence than we had. That's why people started building brands. At the same time, it started giving us these anxieties that we don't have as many as the person sitting at the table next to us, you know? There is always someone with more, unless you're Selena Gomez, and there's no one with more followers than Selena Gomez. But that's where the influential phase came in, and I would say in 2015, we're entering into, or in the last few years, we've entered into this problem-solving era, and that's what I want to talk a little bit about today. I think that we're on the front edge of problem-solving, and it's exciting because there's people in all these different communities that are feeling senses of problem solving and giving their lives to restoring these places. Yesterday I was in Huntsville, Alabama, meeting with a bunch of people. It was like I saw 5 projects yesterday that are amazing that I could have never concepted. No one in this room could have concepted. The only people that could have concepted it are the people that were in those communities that started feeling responsible for changing that community. You know, not necessarily that the community was bad, but there was some things in the midst of it that they needed to bring to light and to bring some restoration to it. So how does this relate? Ultimately, progress, it's this idea that we want to make things better in the world, that progress is simply the daily decision to make things better in a broken world. And that's where my faith comes into this, right? What's interesting is even the people in our community that don't have a faith perspective that is the same as mine, they agree with this. For some reason, they believe that something is not right in our communities. Something is broken. And they want to be a part of fixing it. They feel responsible for that. So I don't know about how you guys have learned this, but these words to me are a really big deal. There's a mentor I had named Mike Metzger that taught me this really simple, these 4 simple rules, these 4 simple words that start to guide how I go about in my problem solving. And ultimately, I would say this is what the gospel is, right? Creation, fall, redemption, restoration. Ought, is, can, and will be. The creation is the original design. This is how it ought to be. So in any problem you're addressing in your communities, I would start with how was it originally supposed to be? There was some idea in some way that things would have been that was right in some way. That's how it ought to be. Ask that question, how ought it be? Second, how is it today? That's where the problem we are. It's where we sit in the midst of our current broken reality that we live in today. And then the question is, how can it be? How can it be? And that's where I think our responsibility starts to play a role in problem solving. We see things that others don't see, and we want to be a part of fixing it in some way. And then how will it be someday? This is when the master creator, right, fully restores it to completion. And it becomes more beautiful than the original design. It's interesting. I think most people can resonate with these words so clearly, even if you don't have the same faith system that I have. So there's two types of people in this world. There's problem solvers and there's problem makers. Y'all know a problem maker? I wish there was more problem solvers, right? But I think that's why we're here. I think you guys care very deeply about something in this world to be a little different. So let's work through this chart together. I'm going to step back so you guys can see it. Problem solvers are action-oriented. Problem makers are gossip starters. So when I see a problem, I think, man, it ought to be different. And I feel responsible for changing that reality. That's what problem solvers do. Problem makers or gossip starters, they just talk about it. They go, look at that problem. Isn't that a problem? And then they point it out to everyone. They're critics. Now, some of you guys at the end of this session are going to be like, I think Jeff's talk was ridiculous. Y'all are just problem makers. Just kidding. I'm just kidding. Problem solvers are purpose-driven. I mean, I think this is people are continuously trying to figure out how do you attract millennials into the work of the future? What is the millennial? How is this good, bad, ugly for the future? I think millennials are drawn towards purpose. So whatever project you're a part of, they're going to be less interested in how much money they're making and more interested in what the bigger story is that they're a part of. They're purpose-driven. Problem makers or job description, they say, well, how does this line up with what I signed up for? If you talk to anyone on my team, they'll be like, oh, they'll just add it to the business card. Like, I didn't know that I was going to be doing this. It's like, yeah, but we're part of a bigger vision. We're part of a bigger story. And you know what? Sometimes things change, That's the team that we've developed. Problem solvers think about team betterment. They think about, or even community betterment. Problem solvers, where they live, they're looking every day at how things could be different, how things could be better. Problem makers are thinking about personal gain. They're thinking about, what could I do to make my name more known? Problem solvers have an abundance mindset. Problem makers have a scarcity mindset. They look at the issue of clean water and they say, it's going to cost billions of dollars, right? That's the problem maker. Where are we going to get that? Scott Harrison said, it only costs a few $1 billion. You see the difference in mindset of how they approach it? Problem solvers feel responsible. Problem makers feel distracted. Problem solvers are future leaders. Problem makers are future forgotten. Or sometimes when I share this, I say problem makers are future fired, right? You don't want that person on your team. They start to suck away the energy and the vision that you have. You want people that are engaged, that are part of this mission that you're a part of. And I think this room, the reason why you're here is you see problems in the world and you probably feel responsible for fixing them. And I use the word fix or solve. Those are sometimes really aggressive words. Oftentimes our community would say, we are problem solvers, but to us, solving a problem might just be making things just a tiny bit better. Am I going to have all the solutions solved? No, because when you start to get into problems, then you start unmasking more problems and more problems and more problems. But they're willing to give their lives to something just to make things a little bit better. I think you guys are probably like that. Brings me a lot of hope. So very quickly, I'm going to go through a few different things that I think problem solvers are. There's 3 things here, and then a couple actions I think you can think about, and then we'll talk with Stephen. But number 1, problem solvers see what others do not see. A great example of this to me, are any of you from Atlanta? Oh, good. Hey, how you doing? Good to see you. We got one Atlanta person, so he knows, right? There's something in Atlanta that's really beautiful. It's called the Beltline. Have any of you heard of this yet, right? And the Beltline was created because one guy, a problem solver in college at Georgia Tech named Ryan Gravel, who's a friend of mine, had to do a thesis project. So he looked at maps and he found an area of a place that could make Atlanta better. What's the biggest issue in Atlanta? And some of you guys that walked in late know. What's the biggest issue in Atlanta? Traffic, right? Traffic. He said, what could I do to make a different scenario to reimagine this city? He found this thing that he referred to as the Beltline. It was an old railroad ties, basically, that was sitting empty. No one uses it anymore. It's a 22-mile circle inside the perimeter of Atlanta that is just sitting there empty, right? And he said, what if that could be a new area that combines neighborhoods? What if that place could actually unify our city? What if people started riding their bikes in that place? What if there was a walkway on that place? What if there was actually a rail car scenario in that place? What could happen? What if instead of buildings having no windows on the back of their buildings, what if the front doors of those buildings faced the Beltline? It was a crazy idea. Cost billions and billions of dollars, right? And he proposed it. He saw something different. He saw what others did not see. And then when he started sharing that with people, other people started seeing it. Right now, there's just a couple miles done of the 22-mile. And if you guys have a chance to go and see it, you'll be like, this is what makes Atlanta beautiful. This is what's amazing. It was a problem solver that saw something that others didn't see. Now, he had to attract a bunch of people to make it happen. He actually didn't actually believe that it could happen, honestly. But people started joining in it because they saw what he saw. And it became this beautiful thing. It's part of something incredible for Atlanta. Secondly, problem solvers do what others don't have the courage to do. There's a project there's a community called Clarkston, which is just on the east side of Atlanta. Clarkston is the most diverse square mile in the entire United States. It is one of the primary places that refugees come into the States. And I had a friend named Kitty. I love it because Kitty is about, I don't know how old Kitty is, 60, would you say? Roughly, late 50s, early 60s. And she came to me 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, and she's like, Jeff, I live in this community. I feel like we need a community hub for this neighborhood, a place where you can get good coffee and all these different cultures can get to know each other. There's so much division in this community. And she's like, I need you to find somebody to do it. And I said, Kitty, you're the person to do it. She said, I don't have the courage to do that. It's like that. I would have to overcome so many fears to bring this into existence. I was sitting with her 2 weeks ago, and the coffee truck's been open for 2 years. It's brought more awareness to refugees in the city than any other project by far. And I was sitting at the truck with her. It's like a mobile truck. They have 2 trucks, one that's there all the time, one that goes all over the city providing coffee for people. And she was telling me that they recently got nominated, I think by CNN, as one of the top 5 civil and human rights locations to visit in Atlanta. It's only been open for 2 years. Why? Because this is a story that brings us the rest of the world to light. Isn't that beautiful? She had to overcome the fears that she had. She's like, I don't even know how to do a pour over a coffee. I don't know how to do that. I was like, yeah, but you have the vision, right? And you need the courage to be able to do it. Thirdly, problem solvers dream in unthinkable new ways. I have a friend named Leroy Barber. And some of you guys may know Leroy. If you've ever spent time with Leroy, you know over one dinner, he will come up with 10 ideas you've never heard of before. And 10 of them are probably not good ideas. But one every so often is a really good idea. He's a great friend of mine. And the thing that's amazing about Leroy, the thing that is amazing is he dreams. He dreams everywhere. If you go with him to a new city he's never been to, he gets in the car the minute he gets there. He gets into a cab and he'll say, take me to the roughest, dirtiest, hardest place in the city. And I remember the first time I went with him, I'm like, what are you doing? We have to be somewhere in like 2 hours. And he's like, come on, let's go. It's going to be fun. Yeah, this is where all the good stuff is happening. So he goes to these communities and he said, in the midst of the darkest areas that people think, that's where you see the greatest light, right? His perspective of dreaming, he sees the good. He believes the future is good, and it's part of our responsibility to be a part of that. Problem solvers dream in unthinkable new ways. So here's a couple things. If you think you're a problem solver, if you have a problem you're trying to solve, here's some things. Maybe you don't have anything right now. Maybe you're like, man, those stories are crazy. Those are so big. I know, but they're real people that were just like you, sitting in a room just like this one day, and then someday they felt a deep responsibility to change something. So here's a couple questions to ask yourself. What is the problem you're trying to solve? Number one, have clarity in this answer. We challenge people to have it be less than 7 words. Imagine that's how many words you can get on a mat in front of your front door. What is the problem you're trying to solve? Have it be very, very clear. Number 2, how are you uniquely solving the problem? There are a ton of copycats in the world. We don't need more of those. Because if their solutions were working, we wouldn't have the problem anymore. Right? Force yourself to address something more creatively than you ever have before. Think about root issues in the midst of this. Why, what is so unique about this new solution? If you have an idea that's very similar to someone else, just join them. You don't have to start something different. How are you uniquely solving the problem? Number 3, why are you the person to solve that problem? And here's what we've realized in the work that we've done. If there's not something in your personal story that's associated with the problem, then you will quit. If you ask anyone on my team, we've been through this with many friends. They have an amazing ability to market and to bring hype to all kinds of stuff, which is good, until it's not good. When you disappoint the people that you're trying to ultimately serve, it's really, really hard. I remember talking to Leroy about a community that he was in South Atlanta. And if he was with me right now, he'd tear up and tell you, the worst thing ever is to bring a bunch of hype and a bunch of people to their community and do the 6-month stint, Be in it with them. People that this is a part of the story that you have, they're not going to give up when times get tough. They are not going to, you will not be able to stop because it's part of who you are. So make sure that you are the person to solve that problem. And if you're not and you have a really creative idea, give it to the person that's doing that. Join them in that because they're not going to quit. Get fully behind that person. Why are you the person to solve that problem? I think I'm going over in time. I apologize. Okay. Number 4, if there were no barriers, what would you do? This is the part where you have to dream bigger than you ever have before. I remember I have a friend that used to be in Atlanta. He plays in the NBA. And I remember I asked him to be a part of something, and he said no to me. And he said, Jeff, if you're going to use my name, it better be big. He's like, if you think of something big, I'm all in. But he's like, don't dream small. He's like, dream. You dream something big, and I am all in with you. I will use my influence with you, and we'll do something big. And I remember, I was like, oh, man. And then he gives me this big pep talk about how I need to challenge and do something really big. So I waited and waited, and I was like, man, I tell my wife, Kyle wants me to do something big. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. She's like, it'll be fine. At the right time, you'll know. And there's this place in Atlanta called Ponce City Market, which is it's on the Beltline that we were talking about earlier. It's become this huge landmark in our city. It's actually the #1 tourist destination in our city now. It's only been open for a year and a half, I think. And I had heard about that they were going to open their roof. And they basically made an amusement park kind of a concept on the roof. There's putt-putt golf, and there's all these old school games like, Pop-A-Shot, and you hit the thing, and I don't know what you call it, strongman something. Anyway. And I was like, they had contacted me one time. It's like, hey, if you ever want to do something, let me know. So I contacted them and said, hey, I heard you're opening up the roof. I just had this crazy idea. What if you let us plan the opening party? And what if it helped the city of Atlanta in some way? And they said, yes. And I said, well, how much would that cost? And they were like, if you plan it, it's free. It's yours. And I was like, okay. So now I got this roof that is supposed to be amazing that no one's ever seen. All right, I got to call Kyle. And I was like, Kyle, there's this. I was thinking, do you want to do a putt-putt golf tournament with me? And he was like, what? That doesn't sound very big. I was like, it's really big. It's actually on top of Ponce City Market. He said, yeah, okay, what are we going to do with that? I was like, we're going to raise money for all these other organizations. And it just kept building and building. We started dreaming bigger than what honestly is possible. You think this multi-million-dollar building is going to give me their roof, and then we're going to play putt-putt, and who goes and does putt-putt for fun? Who does this? Nobody does this. It's like, let's just do it. Let's see what happens. And oh, by the way, it opens in 33 days. It's like, okay, so what if we could raise like $100,000? Great, let's try it. Ultimately, people started responding in every way possible. Every day we were increasing the price. It was crazy. Increasing the price. Oh, you didn't get it yesterday. We're going to increase the price tomorrow. And just people kept saying yes. People kept saying yes. We had 1,000 people on the roof. And we raised $246,000. It was crazy. It was like if I ever could have planned. I could not have planned. Come on, there's seats up front. There's lots of space. Come on in. If there were no barriers, what would you do? Think bigger than you can do on yourself. If your idea you can do on your own, it's probably not going to solve a problem, ultimately, right? Sorry, last couple, then I'm done. Number 5, who do you need to attract? This is a challenge we have for our community. Put 10 names on a piece of paper you always should have. 5 of them are people that are probably within one connection of you, and 5 are ridiculous. I always have a name on ours that is named Ted Turner. If I'm doing social entrepreneurship in Atlanta, he actually is an amazing social entrepreneur. He's one of the biggest advocates for bison in the world. He's changed media as we know it. Someday, I will get a chance to meet with him. If he gets involved in our organization, think about the exponential change that will create for what we're doing. Think about the people you need to attract to solve the problem you're going to do. Number 6, how will you sustain that solution? That's a very long, hard question, but it's something you need to be thinking about. So ultimately, I believe that the future is good, but it is up to us to create it. I believe the problems you feel and that you see that others do not see, the spaces and the communities that you're in that others are not in, we get the opportunity to be a part of a new way, a new solution.